Anyway, back to France. In fact, we're going to finish France today, and I think we are anyway, you never know. Next on the agenda is Spain. We did England, France, next is Spain. And we'll have a very different situation, just as France was a very different situation from England. Spain is a very different situation from France, with a few similarities along the way, of course. Now, when we left off, we had just started talking about the beginnings of the Second Republic. What a story this is going to be. We covered the Revolution of 1830, which brought Louis Philippe to the throne. You see that up above there. His monarchy was called the July monarchy, or he was called, often referred to as the Citizen King. And but then along comes the year 1848. And 1848 was a watershed year in the history of Europe, not just France. It was a year of revolution. And I think I might have covered this last time. But Europe exploded in revolt. In practically every country of Europe, with the only exception probably being England, but with Queen Victoria on the throne. She had her problems, but she worked her way through them. And but in all these other countries, they saw France as kind of their guiding light. After Louis Philippe left, because of the Revolution of 1848, he made his way to England. The Chamber of Deputies, the part of the government that was left behind, kind of left in the lurch, they appointed a provisional government. Oftentimes, when a government falls, you have a provisional government. That is a temporary government. This certainly was the case in Russia when the Tsar abdicated in the midst of World War I. A provisional government was appointed. And it was the provisional government that the Bolsheviks, the communists, overthrew in the October Revolution of 1917. These temporary governments are kind of a placeholder until they can somebody can write a constitution and then have elections. Hopefully have elections, and then the new government that is elected in these elections will replace the temporary government. The provisional government ceases to exist, and the new government comes and takes over. And that's what's going to happen here, to a certain extent. This provisional government was established, made up primarily of journalists, liberal politicians, socialists, and lawyers. The leader of the government was a man named Louis Blanc. Louis Blanc was the founder of French socialism. And they toyed for a while, although I think it was mainly lip service. This temporary government toyed for a while with establishing a monarchy by offering the throne to Louis Philippe's grandson. But that, I think, as I said, historians aren't sure. They might have done that just to say they were thinking about it, because they really wanted the republic. So they established the Second Republic on February 26, 1848. And Louis Blanc, as I said, was a politician, a historian, and one of the founders of French socialism. Yeah, he and his friends wasted no time, even though they were supposed to be a temporary government. They were a provisional government. They wasted no time setting about accomplishing some of their goals. For example, they enacted universal male suffrage, which had been enacted before, but it died out in subsequent governments. Universal male suffrage, which raised the franchise and increased the number of eligible voters in that next election from about 250,000 to about 9 or 10 million. So that was quite a boost, and this is something they will curse the day, or maybe I should say they will rue the day that they did that, as you'll see in a few minutes. They also reduced the work day to the 10 hours. 10-hour, they had just done that, or there was a provision in England to do that, called the 10-Hour Act. Workers in the factory sometimes worked 14 hours a day. 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day, and there are only 24 hours in a day, so, well, let me tell you that none of the factory workers are going to be going to the Elks Club or joining the softball team for after work recreation, let me put it that way. They also abolished slavery in the colonies, something which will be repealed by their successors. They also granted freedom of the press was restored, and almost overnight, nearly 300 new newspapers, up from 4, appeared in Paris alone, just in the city of Paris alone. Corporal punishment in the prisons was abolished, and debtor prison was abolished also. Sending people to prison was common practice if you incurred too much debt. But to Blanc and the socialists, the most serious nation facing the problem, most serious problem facing the nation at that time, and I'm talking about the provisional government here, was high unemployment, particularly in the urban areas and particularly in Paris. One of the main goals of socialism is full employment and a guaranteed income to be ultimately provided by the government. So to solve the unemployment problem, they established a government-funded cooperative workshop program, which would put unemployed workers to work. What happens next is another string of events that will lead to another stolen revolution that will further anger the radical Republicans and socialists of France, an anger they still carry in their hearts today. This episode, and what happens next for the radical Republicans and socialists, is a virtual repeat of the frustrating events of 1830 when they had their revolution stolen, and a perfect example of a major, what I would call a major political disconnect that is, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, a common occurrence, not only in French politics, but in many modern industrialized societies today. What I'm talking about here, the crux of this problem, is the fact that the Parisian citizens, the citizens of Paris, tended to be far more liberal than the rest of the nation. And which, once again, is really not that unusual. Most nations today can count more liberal people in urban areas and more conservative areas in rural areas. It's a fact of political life. The only difference between then and now is the population distribution was reversed, with most people living in the rural areas and fewer in the cities, since the cities back then were not the huge mega cities that we have today. So when those elections were held in April to replace the provisional government that I just spoke of, to establish the new legislature in the new Second Republic, the conservatives won a huge majority, with fewer than 100 socialists as against 500 moderate Republicans, and about 200 monarchists. So the other way to look at it is the socialists were outnumbered 100 to 800 in the legislature. Not surprisingly, the main issue for the conservatives was the high taxes being raised to establish Blanc's new workshop program. And the fact that so many workers had moved to Paris, there wasn't enough work to go around, so they were paid anyway, whether they worked or not. Now, where did the government get the money? By raising taxes. Now, also a factor in this rightward shift was the introduction of universal male suffrage. That's what expanded the electorate. The new peasant vote more than counterbalanced the radical Parisian workers' vote. So the liberal radical efforts to expand the electorate backfired and led to a sweeping conservative victory. This did not sweeten the mood of the already angry liberal Republican, radical Republicans especially, who now felt robbed again. So when this new conservative-dominated legislature was seated, guess what one of the first things they did? They canceled the workshop program. Threw it out. Mainly because of the cost. This threw tens of thousands of now unemployed workers onto the streets of Paris, where they became an angry mob attacking anyone and anything they felt responsible for their predicament. The new government ordered the French general, Louis-Eugène Cavaignac was his name, to use whatever means necessary to clean up the streets. Over the next 3 days, June 24th, 25th, and 26th, he did exactly that. It is estimated that approximately 12,000 people were arrested, 5,000 to 10,000 were killed or injured, and almost 1,000 soldiers were likewise killed. This event is known in French history as the Bloody June Days. This ended, for all intents and purposes, ended the Revolution of 1848, and as you can imagine, left the, once again, liberal radicals extremely upset, since, as mentioned, once again, they felt their revolution had been hijacked by conservatives since the election did not go their way. Again, it led to a radicalization of the French liberal movement and increased to a degree the popularity of more radical anarchist groups, including socialists and communists. It was this series of events, by the way, this revolution of 1848, the subsequent actions of the new Second Republic, that led Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to publish their famous pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto, which was published that same year in 1848. Now, you might think that's it, but, well, as the guy on TV says, wait, there's more. Ironically, as it turns out, the conservatives really won't get their way either. With the new Constitution, they thought they would try an American idea in their new Constitution of electing a separate executive in the person of a president. There were 3 candidates on the ballot in the running, but it was really a race between 2, the aforementioned General Cavaignac, the upper-class hero of June Days, the June Days, and a man with a tremendous amount of what today we would call name recognition. He was none other than the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. His name was Louis Napoleon. That's right, another Louis and another Napoleon. Okay? Who won a smashing victory with over 75% of the vote, and was elected to a 5-year term as president. Okay, president of France. Okay, so far so good, but here comes what I call one of history's greatest double crosses. Louis Napoleon, I got his picture here. Well, this is some of the actions taken during the June Days here. But here's Louis Napoleon. He loved being president. But there was a problem, at least as far as he was concerned. According to the Constitution that established the Second Republic, the president could only serve 1 term. Louis asked the legislature to amend the Constitution to allow him more terms. But in 1852, when the legislature refused, he took matters into his own hands and followed his uncle's example by staging a coup d'etat on December 2nd, 1851. Now that date should ring a bell, December 2nd, because that was the 47th anniversary of his uncle's coronation as Emperor of France in 1804. Same day. This brought an end to the Second Republic. Ironically, both the First Republic and the Second Republic only lasted about 4 years. Okay? Then, a year later, on the same date, December 2nd, 1852, he declared himself Emperor of the new, what is now going to be called the Second Empire. All right? And this was the 48th anniversary of his uncle's coronation as emperor of the First Empire. He decided to rule as Napoleon III. If you're going to be an emperor or king, you got to have a Roman numeral after your name, right? And all kings have a Roman numeral. Henry VIII, Henry II, so on and so forth. He declared himself emperor, and he decided to call himself Napoleon III because he counted Napoleon's son, who was briefly the king of a small Italian kingdom. That was Napoleon II. And of course, Napoleon Bonaparte, the famous general, that was Napoleon I. So he will be ruled and known in history as Napoleon III. Okay? So in two fell swoops, he ended the Second Republic and founded the Second Empire. As I said, another Louis, another Napoleon, and two more coup d'etat.
What's the literal translation of coup d'etat?
To strike the state.
Strike the what?
The state, the government, the nation.
The snake?
State.
State.
State. S-T-A-T-E. Okay? Coup d'etat. It's actually coup d'etat, but it's, you run the words together and say coup d'etat. Okay, so let's talk about the Second Empire and our friend Napoleon III here. Here's another more regal portrait of him. Actually, is that a photograph? No, I think that's a photograph. Napoleon III was an enigma, not unlike his famous uncle. But early on, he warned everyone when he said, and I quote, this is his famous quote attributed to him, when he said, "I am prepared to be baptized in the waters of universal suffrage, but I do not intend to live with my feet in a pub." Unquote. He had famous admirers and detractors. Louis Pasteur, the famous French scientist, liked him, but another author, Victor Hugo, did not like him. In fact, it was Hugo who dubbed him Napoleon le Petit, Little Napoleon. Perhaps it was his vain attempt to please everyone that doomed him to failure. For example, in the early days of the Second Republic, he supported what was known as the Fallot Law of 1850, which turned over almost all elementary education to the Roman Catholic Church, which had not controlled education since the French Revolution. And that pleased conservatives, which is probably why he did it. But later, when his actions supporting the unification of Italy, which was going on at the same time, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, were seen as damaging to the papacy, and he lost Catholic support. So he would do something that would gain support of one group, but then just wait, they'll do something to lose it. His main thrust was to lead like his uncle. He wanted to at least maintain his nation's standing abroad and promote progress at home while trying to reconcile the left and the right polemicists within a climate of combining order and liberty. Good luck. This Bonapartist attitude toward rule may remind us of another more modern strong figure in French politics who kind of tried to do the same thing. His name was, of course, Charles de Gaulle. Today, historians tend to be kinder to Napoleon III. It is felt that he has been judged too harshly based on his downfall, which we'll be getting to before the end of today's lecture. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine, two pretty valuable pieces of territory that France is going to lose in a few years. He was just a little too proud of himself. I mean, just look at him. You can kind of tell by looking at him, can't you? He was just a little too proud of himself, which of course makes him too easy to hate. He is the one who commissioned the beautification of Paris under the prefect of the Senate, Baron Haussmann, which we still enjoy today every time we visit France's capital. He also presided over France's Industrial Revolution, some 100 years after the English example. The English, of course, were the first nation to industrialize. The French industrialization can be summed up in 4 words: banking, credit, railroads, and metallurgy. As in most other industrial revolutions, it was accompanied by far-reaching social consequences, which usually led to a strengthening of the popularity of socialism. although opposed to socialism, he tried to help the working classes. In his earlier days as a prince, he even wrote a pamphlet called The Extinction of Poverty. He made a show of helping workers by allowing unions, legalizing strikes, and certain cooperative ventures, but they had to remain nonviolent and not interfere with the right to work on the part of those who opposed the socialists. Good luck with that. But then, at other times, he became somewhat authoritarian at one point. His government prohibited college professors from wearing beards. Imagine what that is. In order to, as he said, and I quote, eliminate the last signs of anarchy. I guess people back then equated the wearing of a beard to anarchy. So I'm looking around, all you guys with beards on, and I'm wondering here. Okay? But as 1860 wore on, he seemed to relax his rule, and many Frenchmen felt they kind of had a republic. Most historians believe that he was an intelligent man who suffered from the weakness of trying to live up to the legend of being a Bonaparte. An image that was probably inaccessible at best. It was perhaps this hubris and the wish to live up to the reputation of his famous uncle that led him into some questionable and costly foreign adventures. He sided with England in the Crimean War against Russia in 1853. Crimean War was a war fought in the Crimea, which is that peninsula of Russia that juts out into the Black Sea, that was part of Ukraine until Vladimir Putin decided to take it back. And nobody did anything about it, except tell him he was a bad boy. This was a victory that virtually shut Russia out of the Mediterranean. And to this day, and will therefore earn Russian enmity into the 20th century. Most of the French casualties were to disease, and at least, and the same was true for the Brits, but they had Florence Nightingale to help with that. This is the war where Florence Nightingale became famous, the Crimean War. The Suez Canal was built and opened by his Spanish wife, Eugenie, in 1869. Not built by her, but she opened it. She supervised the MC, the ceremony that opened the Suez Canal. Probably the world's greatest canal. The Panama Canal is a pretty good one too, but Suez Canal, very, very valuable. Very, very strategic. Okay?
Are there any locks on the Suez?
No, the Suez Canal is a sea level canal. No locks. You sail straight through. It's a ditch, dark through the desert. Although it will eventually end up in British hands through some financial sleights of hand on the part of the British, something they were good at. He almost entered the American Civil War on the side of the South, giving President Lincoln some anxious moments. He attempted to overthrow a recently installed liberal government in Mexico, led by the first Native American leader of the American nation, by the name of Benito Juarez. Juarez had just won a civil war in which he defeated a conservative force led by rich landowners, the church, and the military. An incredible feat. Stop and think about it. Made possible by heavy borrowing from the U.S., Britain, and France. When he asked to put off repayment of the loans, the U.S. and Britain said, okay. But France said, no, we want our money. And with the Pope's blessing, because the Pope hated Benito Juarez, Benito Juarez was probably an atheist, okay? Napoleon invaded Mexico. As French troops marched up from the east coast of Mexico to Mexico City, they were defeated at the Battle of Puebla on May 5th, 1862. May 5th.
Yes.
Cinco de Mayo, which is not that great a holiday in Mexico. More Mexican immigrants celebrate it here in this country than I think they do in Mexico. Okay? But this was only a temporary setback, this loss of the Battle of Puebla, as the Habsburg Prince Maximilian was eventually installed, although eventually defeated by Juarez. in 1868, leaving Maximilian to be executed by a firing squad in 1868. Famous painting by Manet of that execution of Maximilian. Napoleon also invaded northern Italy at the behest of, at the request and behest, I suppose, of the Prime Minister of Piedmont, Sardinia. You see, Italy at that time was not a united nation. All these different colors represent different nations. Sardinia, Piedmont, the green area you see here, was led by a brilliant prime minister whose name was Camillo Cavour. And he was a believer in a political philosophy becoming very popular in Europe at the time. We're going to see another example of this, called realpolitik, the reality politics, you might say. What happened was, you see, most of northern Italy at the time was controlled by the Austrians. Austria's up here. This is all Austria. And the Austrians, of course, needed the seaports, so they controlled northern Italy. And Cavour realized he was not strong enough to fight the Austrians. They were, after all, the mighty Habsburg Empire. So he asked Napoleon III, for some help. And Napoleon thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to establish his fame. After all, his uncle he cut his teeth in the French army in Italy, didn't he? And so he thought he could do the same thing. French troops fought 2 bloody battles against the Austrians and defeated them. But when Napoleon got the casualty reports, he kind of realized he'd been had by someone that was a little smarter than he was. And so he withdrew his troops, but that was okay because by then the Austrians had withdrawn, and so Cavour and the Italians were able to take control of northern Italy, proving Cavour to be the genius here. Since he got the French to do his dirty work, it's kind of like Tom Sawyer talking to his friend and then painting the fence. You know? Cavour later became Prime Minister of the new United Italy. In return for this little action, by the way, France was given the territories of Savoy and Nice, both former possessions of Piedmont. See, this is the island of Sardinia. This area of Sardinia was called the Piedmont. Well, here is Savoy and here is Nice. So those 2 territories were given to France. And this is the first time since the Revolution, since Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, this is the first time that French territory enjoyed a major gain, which was very nice. Okay, all right. Moving on. By the way, Cavour's actions, along with the other great Italian nationalist Garibaldi, are examples of the other way that nationalism unites people. I discussed this earlier. And these people were Italians. All the people who lived in these areas were Italians. They spoke the Italian language. They loved Italian food. Who doesn't? And Italian music. Okay, loved to go to the opera and so forth. At least they could understand what was going on. And but there was no Italy. There were all these Italians going around calling themselves Italians, but there was no Italy. And the spirit of nationalism says that a large group of people who share the same culture should have their own nation. So nationalists like Cavour and Garibaldi got almost all, not all, but almost all of Italy to form a new united nation, which they called themselves Italy. Still do today. The areas that didn't, you see this area here were the Papal States. The Papal States belonged to the Pope. And this is where Napoleon got in trouble with Catholics back in France, because he supported the Papal States going over to the new Italy. And all that's left of the Papal States is Vatican City, which is the smallest nation in the world. 31 acres, I believe. Okay? And there's a tiny little town over here called San Marino. Yeah, San Marino, where is it? Right there. That's about right. They're still an independent nation today too. They're not the smallest though, because they're larger than Vatican City. Okay? But the coup de grace for Napoleon III came in 1870, when Napoleon walked into a clever trap laid by the formidable Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who, like Cavour, will outsmart and outmaneuver him. This latest defeat for Napoleon III began when France, afraid of encirclement, opposed the nomination of a relative of the Prussian Kaiser Wilhelm I for the vacant throne of Spain. There are always vacant thrones. Spanish history is full of vacant thrones. And wars have to be fought over who gets to assume the throne. It was a strongly worded opposition because Napoleon was afraid that if the Habsburgs controlled Spain, they already controlled Germany and Austria. If the Habsburg, France will be surrounded. Once again, the same problem that Cardinal Richelieu had. That started the which war? 30 Years' War. Okay. So Napoleon sends a telegram to the German Kaiser. Strongly worded opposition that came just short of mentioning the W word, war. But in fact, the Kaiser withdrew the nomination. It wasn't that big a deal with the Kaiser. He wasn't a Habsburg. He didn't care that much. But he wanted his fellow Germans, because Austrians are Germans too, aren't they? They speak German. They're German culture. Okay? Some Austrians might object to me saying that, but culturally, they were Germans. Okay? And so the Kaiser sends Bismarck, his chancellor, his prime minister, a telegram to the effect that authorized him to make it public. In other words, he said, look, let's withdraw, get out of this whole mess, and you can make this all public. But Bismarck, never one to pass up an opportunity, craftily doctored the telegram to imply that the Kaiser had refused to see the French ambassador due to his escalation of demands on the matter, thus making the famous, and this telegram is known in history as the Ems Dispatch, because the Kaiser was at Ems, which was a spa. He was enjoying his hot spring baths there, and looked like a blatant insult to France and to Napoleon III. Now, you remember the picture of Napoleon III. It would be pretty easy to insult him, wouldn't it? It wouldn't take much. It wouldn't take much. Okay? Well, so Napoleon was led by the Empress, his wife, and by public outrage to declare war on Prussia. And this is the beginning of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. And though he was visibly aging at the time, suffering from painful gallstone, he hopped on his horse and almost fell off because of the pain, and led the troops into battle. Now, why would Bismarck do such a thing? Why would he doctor this telegram to make it look like the French had been insulted? On purpose he did that. At least that's what most think. As to his reasons, well, historians argue about that too, but most agree that Bismarck wanted a war with France. Bismarck was very busy at this time trying to unite as many of the German states as he could into one powerful new Germany. Germany was in the same boat as Italy at that time. It was cut up into a whole bunch of tiny little nations, about 50 of them. And Bismarck thought, you know what? Because once the Germans started to industrialize, look out. German engineering, German science, German natural resources. You add that all together, you're going to have one powerful nation, folks. Aren't you? Look what they did over the next 75 years. Okay? You're going to wreak a lot of havoc. And Bismarck realized this, so he wanted to unite all the German states into one Germany. Bismarck was, through coercion and outright war, he had convinced most of the northern German states to join the new nation, to join up with Prussia, which was the most powerful of the German states. But in the south, where Bavaria held sway, Bismarck was seen as a Prussian bully, which of course he pretty much was. But, be that as it may, there were strong feelings of nationalism once again in Germany. But they had taken a back seat since 1815, and many independence-minded German states had zealously guarded their independence for the past century. But Bismarck had enjoyed much success in the north. I don't have my map. Sorry. Let's go back. In the north, we'll cover this when we get to Germany. Much success in the north, but not in the south because of the influence of mainly the Bavarian state. There are a couple of others. The southern German states well remembered, however, the last time such a war was fought, as Napoleon Bonaparte marched through these states, wreaking death and destruction on his way to Berlin. Hopefully, if such a war broke out again, Bismarck thought, these southern German states would want the protection of the Prussian army. Not yet did everybody know, but probably at the time was the best trained, best equipped, best led army of Europe. And of course, Bismarck would be happy to protect those southern German states, but the price would be you link up with us, you become part of Germany. Then Bismarck thought he could then apologize to Napoleon, say, oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to do that, and make friends with the French again, and everyone would live happily ever after. But that's not quite what happened. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71 will prove to be a brutal lesson for the French, almost as great as the French Revolution itself. The French army had not been reorganized after the disastrous Mexican expedition. Mobilization was slow, the general staff was divided, the German Krupp steel artillery was far superior to the outmoded French copper cannons they were still using. The French were outnumbered almost 2-1, and the enemy's tactics were far more sophisticated. The erratic Marshal Bazin became encircled at Metz, and Napoleon, trying to relieve him, became encircled in his turn at Sedan. And to avoid heavy losses, surrendered along with his troops. This ignominious lightning defeat stunned Europe by its revelation that the major power on the continent was no longer France, but the new nation of Germany. Even Bismarck was shocked at the German army's quick success. It eventually, and also inevitably, set in motion the on-again, off-again French constitutional seesaw. Here we go again. For no sooner had the news from Sedan, where Napoleon surrendered, and by the way, he was carted off to a German prison, reached Paris, then the Republican deputies proclaimed, here we go, a new republic. A new republic. The third republic. But, like its two predecessors, would be born in blood. A whole lot of it. So, let's see. Why don't we take our break now? Any objections? Let's take our break now since we're starting a pretty good long topic here. All right? So let's come back at, what do you think, 12 or 5 or something? All right, the Third Republic. It's going to last a little longer, as you can see. Bloody beginnings. Boy, what a mess. Paris still suffers under what's going to happen here. Especially Paris and all of France. And speaking of Paris, as we've kind of already seen over and over, Paris isn't really France, is it? I mean, yeah, it's the capital of France, it's in France, of course, but don't think everybody in France are like the Parisians, and don't think the Parisians are like everybody else in France.
Washington DC is not.
Well, Washington, we got the same thing with Washington DC, correct, yeah. Good point. Even today, there tends to be a certain political tension between Paris and the provinces, or the departments, as they're now called. It was Paris which led the way in the successive revolutions from 1789 onwards, only to discover, as when the Republicans were routed in 1849, that the Catholic, more traditional conservative countryside was not behind it. And well, here comes another defining moment in the relationship between France and the rest of the country, presenting itself with vengeance in 1871. In the months following the humiliating surrender of Napoleon III at Sedan to the Prussians, to the Germans. It's going to be, yes, deja vu all over again. Within weeks of the declaration on September 4th of this new Third Republic, the Prussian army was at the gates of Paris. You see, that's where Bismarck went wrong. His army was far more successful than even he thought it would be. He thought after 6 months or so of fighting, it would be a stalemate and he could call the whole thing off. But after 6 months of fighting, they were knocking on the door of Paris. They were laying siege to Paris. Okay? But the government decided to fight on. And in a colorful episode, the Minister of the Interior, a man by the name of Gambetta, escaped from the city in a hot air balloon and went to the city of Tours, or Tours, however you want to say it, where he raised a new, if ill-trained army of 600,000 men. However, Marshal Desans, a monarchist, surrendered with his 180,000 men at best, largely to show his disdain for the new republic, which he didn't favor. This is Marshal Desans, the French commander. And when attempts to break the Prussian stronghold on Paris failed, initial peace overtures were made. These were rejected by Bismarck, and during the cold winter months without coal or wood, Parisians were not only bombarded, but reduced to eating everything from cats, dogs, and rats, to the two beloved elephants, Castor and Pollux, in the local zoo. A succession of military defeats in December and January forced the government to withdraw to Bordeaux. And the ultimate humiliation came when the Prussians, now ensconced in Versailles, consecrated the new German nation, announced the formation of Germany, and the proclamation of the new German Empire in Louis XIV's Great Hall of Mirrors. And here's a famous painting of that. Here's the Kaiser. But notice he's not in the center of the picture, is he? This guy is. Otto von Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck, the architect of this tremendous victory. Was he rubbing salt in the wounds of the French? Yes, he was. He understood this very much. But he didn't stop there. The nightmare was only beginning. By this time, much of Paris lay in ruins. And as a condition of the inevitable surrender, Bismarck insisted on new elections for a new French government. Call it whatever you want, he said. You want to call it the Third Republic, you want to call it the Third Empire, you call it whatever you want. But he wanted a new government, ostensibly, to give legitimacy to the inevitable surrender agreement / treaty that he was about to impose upon the French. But no doubt also because he anticipated the result, which was another sweeping victory for conservative royalists over the Republican socialists. Apparently, Bismarck understood French history better than most Frenchmen in Paris did. As you can imagine, these events greatly added to the sense of humiliation and betrayal for the Parisians, who had been running their own city during the siege and who resented Bismarck's armistice terms, which involved not only the loss of Alsace and much of Lorraine, two huge chunks of territory on France's eastern border along the Rhine, plus an indemnity of, count them, 5 billion francs. But the disarmament of the Parisian troops in the capital who had withstood the long siege. It was a slap in the face to the Parisians. This anti-Prussian, anti-government feeling on the part of the Parisians was reinforced by the installation of a newly elected moderate assembly at Versailles, French assembly at Versailles, which raised fears of a restoration of another monarchy and by the withdrawal of pay from the Parisian National Guard. Paris had always had their, well, not always, but off and on, had their own National Guard for the city of Paris. They called it the National Guard. It was founded during the French Revolution. The members of the National Guard, this has been the only income of many families during the siege. So when the French army was sent into Paris on March 18th to remove the cannons stationed on Montmartre. Montmartre is that rise, that hill in France, in Paris. Used for the defense during the siege, it meant armed resistance, which forced it to withdraw. So now Frenchmen were firing on Frenchmen, leaving the triumphant Prussians with a ringside seat over the next 10 weeks for the fratricidal standoff between the moderate French government headquartered at Versailles and the liberal, leftist, socialist city government set up in its own capital, which called itself by now the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune. The Commune was a largely spontaneous reaction to these highly exceptional circumstances, but while there was no deep-laid plan involved, its driving ideas, a will to continue the war against the Prussians, which nobody else shared with them, social justice as defined by the liberals and radicals and socialists, anti-royalism and anti-clericalism, had been hardened by the siege and the government surrender and agreement to the terms of Bismarck's armistice. Republicans, socialists, and anarchists rubbed shoulders with the new National Guard members and ordinary lower middle class and working Parisians in an extraordinary experiment in democratic self-government, conducted by leaders who, on the whole, were cautious, moderate, and respectful of property. They set up representative structures. They declared the separation of church and state. They established a system of workers' control of the factories that had been abandoned by their owners, and imagined a federal France consisting of self-governing communes like their own, with no real national government at all. And indeed, there were similar communes set up in several other cities and towns in France, but these were greatly suppressed, and it was doubtless only a matter of time before the heavily royalist new republic would put an end to this humiliating defiance from its capital city. And it did so with 100,000 troops during the Semaine Sanglant, or the Bloody Week, towards the end of May, and with a vengeance inflamed by the desire to stamp out once and for all these never-ending radical revolutionary troublemakers, you might say, Paris. While the communards, as they called themselves, facing defeat after pitched battles in the streets, executed some 500 hostages. They had taken hostages during this little civil war, including the Archbishop of Paris, who was also executed. He was shot before a firing squad. Fire was set to the Tuileries and the Hotel de Ville, and what shocked a correspondent from the London Times was the rather, and I quote, inhumane laws of revenge under which the Versailles troops had been shooting, bayoneting, ripping open prisoners, women, and children during the last 6 days. So far as we can recollect, the reporter went on, there has been nothing like it in history, even French history. The final tally of this systematic killing and mass summary executions was 20 to 25,000 communards as against less than 1,000 government troops. In addition, over 43,000 prisoners were taken, of whom more than 10,000 in military tribunals extending over the next 5 years received sentences ranging from execution to hard labor for life, to deportation to New Caledonia in the Pacific, or a fixed term of imprisonment. These numbers far exceeded those of the Reign of Terror. The new republic had certainly shown its teeth, to the extent that weakened the socialist movement in France for a generation. For a long time, the Commune was rather like an embarrassing family secret for the French, as illustrated by the controversy in 2001 over finally naming a small square in Paris after it. The bitterness it caused was not simply due to the number killed, but to the fact that this civil war was a feast for the onlooking Prussians who sat there with a smile on their face watching the whole thing happen. The conquerors. And that it involved the Republic killing Republicans. The wall of the Confederates in Père Lachaise in cemetery, where the communards made their last stand, is still a place of pilgrimage for leftists, anarchists, socialists, and communists who have always detested the triumphalism of building the great white basilica of Sacré-Cœur. Sacré-Cœur, this is on top of Montmartre. They built it out of white, I don't know if it's white marble or plaster, but they shine lights on it at dusk, and you can see it for miles and miles and miles around. And it's the Church of the Sacred Heart, Sacré-Cœur. Overlooks the site of this urban battlefield. And to many of those who built it and ordered its building, it was built in order to expiate the crimes of the communards. They had felt that France was being punished by God because of this horrible civil war. According to a government decree in 1873 calling for its construction. And it's an incredible sight too, by the way. You see these, I can barely make out here. There are two funiculars, because it's up on a hill, and then there are two funiculars that go down. Oddly enough, I think it's the red light district of Paris is where it ends up. But I remember my wife and I visited this a long time ago. We went there for our honeymoon the summer after we were married. And I went inside, took pictures, and I took some pictures from outside, and this picture is almost an exact copy. As we were going down the funicular, because the bus was waiting for us down there. It wasn't because of the red light district. We were going down the funicular down below, and I was looking down, and all of a sudden I felt the lights. The lights just went on because it was dusk. And I turned around, and that's the exact shot that I saw. But it was crowded in there, and I had a camera. They hadn't invented digital photography yet. And I was taking slide film. I think I had Kodachrome in my camera. But I focused my camera and stuck it out the window and just kind of lined up the lens and took the picture, and that's the picture I got. So I had to slide it back. It's ours exactly the same one as that. I don't think it is, but it's hanging in my hallway. If you ever come by and see me, that's where it is. Had a print made from it. More significantly, perhaps, beyond the bitterness, the wild rumors and the taboos surrounding the commune, there are questions to be asked about its real political significance. A lot has been written about this stage in French history. If the commune was hardly the bloodthirsty red specter presented in the conservative newspapers at the time, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Some say, oh, this is gross over-exaggeration of what really happened. But Karl Marx saw this as the perfect example of what his theory of the communist takeover of the world would be like. This was the model. This was to serve as his model. The glorious, he called it the glorious, I quote, the glorious harbinger of a new society. Or the very image, as Engels put it, of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is what Marx called his final workers' paradise, after all the things that he predicted would happen would happen. But there was a problem. It failed. They lost. They lost. In fact, Marx would later change his mind about the value of the commune as a model of actualized communism. As well he might, for the circumstances in which the event had occurred were so exceptional as to be very unlikely to ever happen again, despite the yearning on the part of the leftists that it would. More fundamentally, the somewhat utopian socialist communalism of the commune, with its democratic republican forms, its respect for private property, and its federal ideas, was quite different from what would emerge as communism. If it was later annexed by the French communists, who still organize a pilgrimage to, as I said, each May 1st, May Day of each year, this was more for sentimental than propaganda reasons, to situate the party in a national revolutionary tradition going back to 1789. The Communist Party, that is, than because it conformed to the impractical ideological orthodoxy of Marx's communism. After all, one of the descriptors of the dictatorship of the proletariat was the absence of government. The commune was less the harbinger of the Russian Revolution than the last series of revolutions going back to 1789. The last throw of the Jacobin tradition is what many French historians prefer to call it. For as one historian shrewdly said, the physical power of the state had been greatly increased by economic modernization and its political authority strengthened by universal male suffrage, unquote. Not quite dictatorship of the proletariat stuff. The commune failed because the utopian city-state could not prevail against a unitary national state, even one that had suffered a humiliating defeat in war. In the Europe of strong nation states at the time, and there are those who argue that these circumstances of the large and powerful modern nation state made not only radical socialism and communism, if not revolution itself, impractical or impossible. But, be that as it may, the Third Republic established itself anyway. Now that the bloodshed was over, the new republic set about setting itself up. The new government was dominated by monarchists and royalists. The left was totally discredited by the actions of the commune. Paris was kept under siege conditions until 1876. Not until 1879 were some of the imprisoned communards released. Paris was denied the right to have a mayor until 1976. Okay? But first things first. Adolph Thiers, who had been running things up till now, did a good job of raising enough money to pay off the Germans, the $5 billion franc indemnity, and end the occupation. So the Prussians went home finally. But when he proposed a Republican constitution, he was forced to resign. Those left in charge clearly wanted some kind of monarchy, but couldn't make up their mind who should be king. That's always a problem. So the new constitution retained the idea of a strong executive, but France, in essence, became a republic anyway, by default, due to the ineptness of not only the left, but the right also. There were heated contests between left and right until 1879, when the Republicans won a significant series of significant victories to where the tricolor and the Marseillaise were finally adopted, and the government moved back to Paris from Versailles. Not that things went smoothly for the left. For the left, either as 60 different governments came and went between 1870 and 1914. But in Europe, that's what happens in a republic. Thankfully, not ours. But we are not Europe. This is the backdrop, while all this was going on, This is the backdrop of that inspired the French to give us our Statue of Liberty. This is when they thought it'd be a good idea to give us this statue, who is Marianne, as if to congratulate us for doing it right, without so much bloodshed, recrimination, and dozens of revolutions, coups, and different governments. The Statue of Liberty is Marianne. Marianne is everywhere you go in France. Everywhere you see these depictions of this woman who represents liberty to the French people. It's kind of the Uncle Sam, like we have Uncle Sam, or the British had John Bull. They had Marianne. Okay? The allegorical representation of liberty used by the French artists for some time, and being put up all over Paris by Republicans.
We like ginger better.
Okay. Soon laws were passed giving France its modern look today: freedom of the press, assembly, the right to divorce, that was a big one, given the influence of the church, the election of mayors, all except for Paris, which didn't happen until 1976, the right to form trade unions, though on condition they remain non-political, free compulsory primary education, which severely weakened the Roman Catholic Church, and for all intents and purposes removed it from the political arena. Thus, it takes its current modern form, pretty much its current modern form, although I'll say a few more words about that, which is where our story of France's metamorphosis from feudalism to monarchy to republic pretty much comes to an end. But let's talk about the conclusion. The Third Republic will last until Hitler defeats France in June of 1940 during World War II. In one of history's greatest coincidences, France's early empires and republics rose and fell in almost the same circumstances. It's amazing. The first empire fell after the defeat and occupation in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo. The Second Empire dies the same death as Napoleon III surrendered his army in 1871 to the occupying Prussians. And the Third Republic likewise fell to Hitler's German troops, who will occupy France until shortly after D-Day, June 6, 1944. Needless to say, France's experience with modern great wars has not been good. The Fourth Republic will follow after World War II, to be followed by the Fifth Republic, founded in the ashes of the French experience in Algeria by Charles de Gaulle in 1958. In order to achieve the political stability that was lacking in the Third and Fourth Republic, the Constitution of 1958, which established the Fifth Republic, adopted what is sometimes called a mixed semi-presidential form of government, combining elements of both parliamentary and presidential representative systems. As a result, the Parliament is a bicameral legislature composed of 577 popularly elected members of the National Assembly, which is the lower house, and 348 members of the Senate, which is the upper house, but the Senate is not popularly elected. It's elected by an electoral college made up of representatives of cities and the departments of France. The president is elected separately by direct universal suffrage and operates as head of state. The Constitution gives the president the power to appoint the prime minister, often known as the premier, who oversees the execution of legislation. The president also appoints the council of ministers, or cabinet, which together with the prime minister is referred to as the government. The Fifth Republic, here's a modern map of France. Those are the departments, sections. Lives on today, but hopefully you can appreciate how much of the political landscape of France has been forged and formed in the French Revolution and the resultant tumultuous, dividing forces of the 19th century. It's quite a story, isn't it? Quite a story about what happens in France. I don't think we're going to see anything else like it except for, of course, Russia. And that got pretty bloody too. Okay? Okay, well, why do we have to study history? I grew up loving history. When in the 5th grade, I would teach my younger brother and my younger sister the history of the world, whether they wanted to hear it or not. If they didn't, I slugged them. But when I started teaching, I started getting those questions, and I was having a hard enough time just to figure out how to handle the class. And they would ask, well, why do we have to be here in the first place? Well, it's the law. Well, that doesn't work. 9th and 10th graders, that means nothing. Or it's a requirement for graduation. That doesn't mean anything, because that's 3 or 4 years in the future, and they're only thinking 3 or 4 hours into the future. What they're going to do after school today, that's the future to them. They don't think of anything else beyond that, with a few, obviously with a few exceptions. So it bothered me, because this is questioning my very existence. The way I make a living, the way I feed my family, the way I pay the bills. So I had to come up with a way, and I thought about it, and just saying it was a requirement, and what else would you take? If you didn't take history, then I don't answer that. And so I began thinking about it, and I finally came up with a little presentation that I would do usually in the first 2 weeks of school. And back then, it was a true world history class. Because I was always interested in the Neolithic period and human anthropology. I took a class in human anthropology, and I loved it. And so I would go back and talk about the Australopithecines and the Homo erectus and the Homo sapiens, and they would always ask, what does Homo erectus mean? I said, it just means you walk on 2 feet instead of 4. That's all it means. Well, what does Homo sapiens mean? I said, it means thinking man. And then I said, but I've met a few I've wondered about. Anyway, so I came up with this little presentation, and it was part and parcel of the Neolithic period. Because when you talk about the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic periods, what separates them? Well, what separates them is progress. The Neolithic period, the invention of farming. And probably fire may have preceded that a little bit, but not by much. The invention of the wheel. The invention of writing. These are the great apocryphal inventions of all time. So I told him, I said, what is it that makes us better than those cavemen? And I had a poster over on the bulletin board of a cave family living in a cave, and what makes you and I better than they are? What makes us live longer? What makes us happier? I think they're happy. They don't look too happy in that picture. And so I said, here's what it is. Let's pretend, make a little diagram for you. Let's pretend that circle represents the sum total of human knowledge 10,000 years ago. Okay? 10,000 years ago, the wheel hadn't been invented yet, farming hadn't been invented, probably fire had not been discovered yet. Fire wasn't really an invention, it was always there. I said, that's 10,000 years ago, right? Isn't that what I said? Well, what if we made a circle for 5,000 years ago? Oh, look, the circle's larger. Because now, farming had been invented, the wheel had been invented, fire had been discovered. And therefore, the sum total of human knowledge is greater. Well, what about 1,000 years ago? What about 500 years ago? Much bigger. What if I were to draw a circle for today? The circle would be as big as the planet. Now, how does that happen? I said, any of you have any pets at home? I've got a Cocker Spaniel at home. She's always very happy when I come home. She wiggles her tail so much. She gets so excited she pees on my feet. Well, let's pretend that the average Cocker Spaniel of 10,000 years ago, that circle right there represents the sum total of knowledge amongst Cocker Spaniels. They didn't know very much. They knew less than we did. Okay? 10,000 years ago. Cocker Spaniels. What about 5,000 years ago? Not much. Okay, how about 1,000 years ago? What about 100 years ago? What about today? Look at that. And here's where all the animal lovers out there would raise their hand and start to argue. That's not true. Cocker Spaniels have done a lot since. Oh yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll agree with you if you can just give me one invention in the last 10,000 years by a Cocker Spaniel. Or, never mind invention, how about a poem? How about a symphony? How about a dramatic piece of drama? Just one. Well, they would say, well, dog collars. They have dog collars now. They didn't have dog collars back in the days of the caveman. I said, well, if you go to the dog collar factory, who's manufacturing those dog? Are Cocker Spaniels making those dog collars? Or is it human beings? There's nothing. We're the only living form on this planet that can make that circle larger. But I still haven't explained why history is so important. Well, what is it about, is it we humans or us humans? What is it about human beings that makes us able to make that circle larger? I asked them. Well, it's because we are able to link. There's a link between our generations. And what is that link? The ability to communicate. Plain and simple. Well, wait a minute. Cocker Spaniels can communicate. If she's eating her dinner and I walk up and want to play with her, she bares her teeth and the hair goes up along her back. And she growls. And she's communicating to me. She's saying, hey, leave me alone. I'm busy. I don't want to be disturbed right now. Or when she pees on my feet, on my shoes, she loves me. She can't contain herself. Okay? They can communicate emotional kinds of things, instinctive kind of things, but they can't communicate complicated ideas. And the kind of communication I'm talking about here is the ability to communicate complicated ideas. For example, the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. That is a complicated piece of communication. There's a lot going on there, isn't there? A lot. Yeah. Okay. But that still doesn't explain history, does it? So that's why you have to go to school. Because we have the ability to communicate complicated ideas, we can teach our young what is important and they need to know while they're still young. You don't have to reinvent the wheel all over again like they do. Everything they learned from their mother was basically how to eat. That's about it. How to fight. If you're a lion on the Serengeti instead of a Cocker Spaniel in my living room. Okay? And then I said, so that's why you have to go to school. So don't ever ask me why do we have to go to school, because that's what separates us from every other living thing on this planet. Okay? And then, and here comes the killer question, what subject do we have to take in school in which we learn about all the great accomplishments and mistakes too that happened in the past by other important humans? Important only because they were there when farming was invented. They were there when the wheel was invented. They were there when the great achievements that we include in these circles was handed down. You don't have to invent those. You can invent something else. So that's why you go to school to get your education and you learn about the past, and we expect you to find the cure for cancer. We expect you to build a spaceship that'll go all the way to Mars. We expect you to build an automobile that doesn't pollute. So get to work, but you gotta learn what came first, don't you? Because you don't want to sit down and have to invent the wheel all over again, do you? So you should thank your lucky stars that you're going to school and that this school offers history.
And they all
What makes
stood
you
up.
human.